Charlie, is there a way to turn it down?
Yes, there is.
Naturally very loud. I don't need that much help. Check. Check. All right. My name is Heaven Campbell. I'm the Florida Program Associate for Solar United Neighbors. Like I said, I'm naturally very loud, so I'm going to try not to be yelling at you. And I'm really excited to be talking to everyone today about Community Solar, Community Solar 101. This is a presentation that we do offer in some of our other states that have very active community solar sectors, but this is our first time presenting this in Florida. So hopefully by this point, being here this far into the day, everyone has a good idea of who we are, Solar United Neighbors, and what we're doing around the state. We are a national nonprofit. We like to say that we're a community of people building a new energy system. We help people go solar, join together, and fight for our energy rights. And we are in 12 states plus DC. Florida, not surprisingly, is the biggest and brightest. Not the biggest by land mass. I can't say that anymore with Texas right there. And has anybody, by a show of hands, been to our solar info session or Solar 101? Great. So you already have a leg up on this presentation. You know what I'm going to say makes a good site for solar. But let's just start there. What makes a good site for solar? First of all, I like to say it's 3 S's. Shade, south, and space. So ideally, and you'll see this here, based on where we're situated, ideally you're going to have a south-facing roof. East and west can also work. You need space, so about 200 square feet of uninterrupted space, and then shade. So you can see in this example over here, that tree is going to be casting way too much shade on that viable roof plane. So little to no shade, enough space, and south facing is ideal. So what makes a bad roof for solar? Obviously, if your roof is in terrible shape and maybe can't hold solar, or if you just have a highly decorative roof or a historic roof, like Dr. Garrity, that just doesn't work out the right way for solar, or like many Floridians, you don't own your roof. So you live in a high-rise condo, or maybe you rent. Those are all going to be bad sites for solar. So what happens to those people? What happens to people who can't easily buy rooftop solar or ground mount and own it at their own home? There's good news. There's a solution. It's called community solar. So community solar is an off-site solar array, and although it's off-site, it's local, and it's literally a shared array or shared system. And in this example here, you can see this would be the elementary school down the road, although they would own a lot more than that. The corner bodega here, and the Smith family over here. So they're all sharing in this off-site array and able to pull from that array. So community solar is often called community solar or shared solar or solar gardens. Again, installed somewhere other than your property. It's proportional, so it's not all or nothing, just like we saw in this example. You're able to own a proportion of that, or a portion of that project, and then the representation in the credits that you receive are proportional to that part that you own. And here's the big thing. Solar energy is virtually credited to your electric bill. So unlike direct ownership, in which you are wired from your rooftop or your ground mount trenched to your home into your main panel, this is virtually credited. So what is that? What's that process look like? I'm not going to go too in depth here. I do want this to be an intro. But right now in Florida, what we have is single owner net metering. So when we talk about net metering, we're actually scraping the surface. There are multiple types of net metering. So right now we have single owner net metering. Something that we brought up to legislation last year was aggregate net metering. That didn't really go anywhere, but it was an introduction. Aggregate net metering would be, you'll see a barn example here, and that's not community solar, so I just want to touch on it briefly. That would be if I owned a farm and I put solar on my barn that has its own meter, but then I also wanted to send some to my house's meter. So different meters, same property address, could be landlord rental situation, very commonly seen in ag. That's called aggregate net metering. And what we want to talk about today is virtual net metering. So this is really the policy and the mechanism behind community solar. Right now we don't have a legislatively enacted virtual net metering policy in Florida. So this is a big piece that we're missing. And this was brought up with some legislation last year from Senator Lori Berman in Palm Beach County that would have enacted community solar for Florida. That did not find a House sponsor and did not move forward. But that did get a lot of press and really opened up the conversation. So virtual net metering allows solar to exist off-site and then be virtually credited to multiple people's bills. So again, we still have this up if you want to check it out. This is an action alert on our Florida Community Solar page that tells you about the bill that was brought up last year from Senator Berman. This is a current map. The orange states are states that have, I believe it's 16 states that have legislatively enacted virtual net metering, which allows them to have community solar. The blue states are states that have independent projects, which are usually utility owned, and we'll talk about that later on. So why is community solar important? Cheaper electricity now and in the future, and mostly these three last points. Fair access to solar for everyone, equitable participation, so people who are renters, people who live in high rises and don't own their roof, and it's community-based power. So it is, although off-site, it is local. So that's a key component of community solar, is that it's local and locally owned. So two different graphs, one's moving clockwise, one is counterclockwise, just overkill, maybe that'll be helpful, on how this works and a little bit more illustration on how that virtual metering works. So this is just the basic of community solar. Customers subscribe to a share of the electrical output. So you're not saying, give me 5 panels. You're gonna say, I wanna offset 70% of my bill, or I would like to purchase 500 kilowatt hours. So that's the first part. It starts with a subscriber. You're gonna buy into a solar project that's going to exist off-site, but locally. And then this is where the virtual part comes in. That solar project is going to be producing energy and sending that to your utility. And then your utility is keeping track of how much energy it's producing and who's subscribed to what. So if you've subscribed to 70%, then that will then be applied to your bill. So just credits right on your bill. And this operator, we'll talk in a couple slides about who that operator is. You'll see the asterisks here. Who's the operator of this solar project? Okay, same thing, one that we made that runs in the opposite direction. So customers come together, subscribe, or build, if that's what that looks like, if it's at the beginning of a project, to a solar garden or a solar system. It makes solar energy. Your utility gets the report from that, gets the electricity from that, and then credits proportionally to your bill as a subscriber. So since we don't have true community solar here in Florida, I'm going to give you a real world example from Maryland. We have many states that have community solar that are state programs. DC, Maryland, Minnesota. Maryland and Minnesota really have standout programs. So in Maryland, they allow both third-party ownership, so Joe Smith's solar development could be a developer that comes in and makes this project, and they own all of the insurance, they take care of all the maintenance, so that would be third-party ownership. And then direct ownership would be, hey, we have a defunct golf course at our HOA. I'm gonna talk to my neighbors and we're gonna directly go in on this together. So they allow both direct and third-party ownership. They do full retail credit, just like rooftop solar. A subscription of up to 200% of annual usage. Anything over what you're actually using, though, is going to be like wholesale costs reimbursed to you. Or you can actually choose to offset that to a low to moderate income customer. Solar on-site and community solar is okay. So this is a big one. What does that mean? Here in Florida, we're seeing a lot of utility subscription programs, and a lot of them have clauses. You can't subscribe to this if you already have solar. So in Maryland, you're able to both subscribe to the community solar garden down the road and have solar at your house. Which can help, for a good example would be like a church or a building that might not be that large but has a lot of electrical usage. So you can have solar on site, and then if you need to cover more, subscribe to a garden to meet additional needs. So there's a carve out for low to moderate income. They allow small non-traditional projects. So an example of a real project in Maryland is a business owner who owns a strip mall, and he has a lot of roof space and not a lot of energy usage. So he puts solar all over his strip mall, uses it for his strip mall, and is able to have his tenants be subscribers, but then the excess is sent to his own home and his sister's home, which is about 30 miles away. So that's a non-traditional project. Geographic and siting diversity. So you can have people, they're a deregulated market, so they are allowed to have people on different utility companies subscribe to the same garden. And then siting diversity, we actually have, I'll mention it at the very end, but we have some siting best practices for what good siting looks like for community solar. A lot of great organizations do. The National Audubon Society has some good best practices for siting, and that means where it goes, right? So siting diversity is important, especially here in Florida. You definitely want to be prioritizing like brownfields and land that can't be better utilized. So I know I'm from Putnam County, which is a very rural county here in Florida, and we have a lot of defunct farmland that has been sold to solar farms at a lower rate because it's not highly utilizable land right now, but could be, had we had community solar, would have been able to be more lucrative that way. Clear consumer protection requirements. So they worked really hard and have state-of-the-art consumer protection requirements in their agreements. So that would be like transparency, ability to have online access to your subscription, ability to have emergency exits with no fees, to be able to pick up and drop off your subscription without fees. So some quick terminology, just giving myself a time check. A subscriber is going to be somebody who buys into the program, so an owner, if you will. A developer, again, can be direct, can be a group of people, can be one person, like that strip mall example, or it could be a third-party organization, like a subscriber organization. So that could be your utility company, or that could be that third-party organization. There are solar companies that this is what they do. They build community solar farms. The landholder can be somebody who is not one of those above. So that's a really interesting position. I've had that brought up to me a lot. People who have extra land. Pine tree farming was big in Florida for a while. So now the market's really fallen on that. So people who have all of this land that was used for tree farming, they might say, we're interested in moving on to the next stage of what this land could be useful for. And maybe they don't want to subscribe or develop the project themselves. They just want to be the landholder and lease it out. That's exactly what I was referring to with defunct farmland. If that farmer wants to keep the land in the family, lease it out. Utility company, straightforward. And then Public Service Commission, that's exactly what it's called here in Florida as well. That's our governing body that governs all of our utility companies. So both investor-owned utilities, which are the for-profit utilities, rural electric cooperatives, and our municipality utilities. So the subscriber organization, they can have a couple different roles. They can just finance it and build it, especially if it's going to be larger. You might need somebody who has bigger financing ability. They can claim incentives like the tax credit. There is a whole world out there of for-profit Fortune 500 companies that buy tax credits from people. They work a lot in tribal communities, working on their nonprofit projects, which they can't absorb the tax credit themselves as nonprofits, but then these companies come in and take the tax credit. Tax credit lending. So they can take those incentives. They can even manage the contracts and subscriptions and billing. They can communicate with the utility, which is really helpful. And they usually, if they're providing these roles, they maintain it for about 25-year terms. So this is a common scenario that leads to community solar that's brought up to me a lot here in Florida. We want clean energy. I know of a space, my pool house at my HOA, this golf course. I have 5 acres out in Tallahassee. So I've got space. And then a developer or an installer, I need customers and space. Or sometimes it's not even the installer, it's just the person who's like, I've got space and I've got friends who want to access clean energy. So this is the basic of what gets it going. So without going too in depth, here are 2 different scenarios, if you will. So the first is what I was just talking about, subscribers coming together and negotiating together. And then the second one is subscriber-owned energy, where there's that direct ownership. So the first example would be a solar project, a solar garden that's built by a third party. A subscriber organization is going to manage this. And then you and me, we both rent down the road. And we're going to subscribe to this and buy shares of this project because we don't own our roofs. So we want access to clean energy, and this is how we're going to get it. The second scenario here is people coming together who can either own or lease this land and saying, hey, there's 50 of us. Okay, we all have about XYZ usage. This is what kind of project we're going to need. We can either go out and try to find, maybe an RFP, find the best developer for this, or we can do this ourselves. We can select somebody and kind of be our own developer and then come up with financing, and we can operate it and maintain it for all of the subscribers we want to open it up to, or we can hire somebody to organize this for us and manage it, kind of like a property manager, if you will. So if you want to learn a little bit more about community solar and how that traditionally looks, we actually have a platform. It's just cs communitysolar.solarunitedneighbors.org. So this is a platform that we maintain to help people responsibly shop for community solar. We ask the right questions and help people understand what they should be looking at. Is this even available to me? Is my utility participating in this solar garden? And those really important consumer protection questions like, What does it cost to exit out of this agreement? How long is my subscription good for? How much am I locked into? So this one would be locked into like 5% below the utility rate. So you can just see what those subscriptions look like and what shopping for them looks like. So now moving on to Florida, not all community solar is equal. These are the three main questions that you need to be thinking about when it comes to the equitability of community solar. And we're actually building out a one-pager that's just like a framing for how to think about community solar. What is it? Like, what is the root of community solar? So these are the three main things we've identified thus far. Is it a good economic deal for participants? Community solar should always lower your bill. In Maryland, the only time it does not lower your bill is if you opt to pay someone else's bill. If you opt to oversize your community solar subscription to take it away from a LMI customer, to pay for a low to moderate income customers access. So it should always lower your bill. You should be able to invest in and ideally own part of that system. It should be customer friendly, which means easy to understand, subscribe and unsubscribe, transferable, and transparent. And it should be a benefit to the community. So should prioritize, and in a competitive market with community solar this will happen, prioritize local job creation. So not out of state or outsourced companies who develop and then go away. Local maintenance jobs. Local job creation is a local project and is adding to reduced brownouts, to grid resilience. And has an LMI carve out or an opportunity for low-income families to participate. So unfortunately right now in Florida, we only have a law that says only a utility company can sell solar, or sell energy rather, which is actually kind of the root of why we don't have aggregate net metering too. You can't transfer, sell, trade any energy, right? Only a utility company can. And right now what we see is utility companies kind of blurring the line of what community solar is and taking that language and really preventing Floridians from understanding what it really is and how it looks in other areas. So what we really have is not community solar, but utility solar subscriptions. These are premium priced subscription programs. In other states, they're also called utility sponsored models. So the utility owns and operates the array. It can be rate-based, which means that building these solar farms, which solar farms are great, can be rate-based and added to approved for rate increase. It actually happened last week, happens all the time if you follow the PSC, the Public Service Commission. So you can pay for those to be built, but then you would also subscribe and pay more to be on those. It may very rarely be a direct subscription in that the solar farm is nearby and you're benefiting directly from the solar produced. Generally, it goes into the general utility mix, so you're not necessarily getting solar power. You're just subscribing to solar being used into the mix. It's, again, always a premium price or subscription. And the way that that is presented as a discount or a deal is a locked-in fuel rate. So in many cases, not all the cases, they all look slightly different. There's around 10 or more utility subscription programs in Florida. But in many cases, you're paying a premium price for access to that solar farm, either directly or into the general mix, and then you're getting a locked-in fuel rate. So your ROI can be very high, your return on investment, hard to predict, and dependent upon rising fuel prices. So that last point, dependent on rising fuel prices. Again, we have some more resources for Florida specific and general. So we have a citing policy. That's good to read if you're worried about what kind of land is being used, where are these projects going. Vote Solar has an awesome guide at sharedrenewables.org. Community solar by state. What does it look like elsewhere? I think having that initial conversation about what is community solar and what does it look like in states that have legislatively enacted community solar is really helpful for us to understand how much further we can go in Florida. So continue the conversation. This is a roadmap that was put together by GTM Research and Grid Alternatives, and this is their vision for Florida. By 2030, we could have almost 4 gigawatts of community solar, and we could have almost 400,000 subscribers served, and we could have almost 200,000 LMI customers supported. So that's really important to think about because we have so many, we have such an awesome aging population here in Florida that we want to be able to age in place and stay and enjoy our state. And then we also have LMI customers who, as compared to the rest of the United States, have a huge electricity burden for their rent. If you look at rent to electricity burden, we have a huge burden where sometimes people who are the hardest hit are paying 30+% of their income to their utility bill. So, questions? Yes.
I believe that Florida Power and Light and all the monopolies here in Florida, they have successfully hijacked community solar. What do we do against this?
So I'm going to repeat the question. He said, I believe that FP&L and monopolies and investor-owned utilities have hijacked community solar, which is a
100%.
More direct way of saying, and I'll take your words, the term itself has definitely been hijacked. So we use it flippantly here in Florida without understanding that we don't have it, because they've taken it and use that word when it's not really what they're presenting. What do we do about it? So I would encourage you to support community solar legislation. Like I said last year, there was some good press around Berman's bill, but it didn't get a House sponsor. It didn't go anywhere. So support legislation that will open up community solar and really understand what it is. Understand that we need virtual net metering to be the mechanism of community solar. You can't have community solar unless you have that policy in place, and most people don't even know what that means. So education, supporting legislation.
I also wanted to say that Vote Solar and Southern Energy Center, or whatever it is, SACE, they have supported actually this hijacked solar by Florida Power and Light big time. And they sell it to us as a revolution. I think we need to say this here, you know? This is not what we want. This is utility solar. This is not community solar. And the blurring that you really brought out, I'm very happy that you did this, Heaven. That is the point.
So
and
I will
we
say,
need to do something about it here, maybe as Solar United neighbors, and not like kind of wait for Vote Solar to do it. Vote Solar and SACE have sided with Florida Power and Light recently, a couple of days ago.
well, I ran over, so I do want to get some more questions, but I will say I can't speak for other organizations. I think that everyone's been very critical. A lot of the positive press has been just the massive amounts of solar farms that will be coming through FP&L, which is a lot of solar, is really going to move Florida up the line in amount of solar installed. But as far as community solar goes, they recently changed their plan to involve an LMI carve-out, but we still need to fight for everyone to have equitable access that's not at a premium price. And I knew there was another question over here. Yes, sir.
Did Commissioner Kemp say 10,000 jobs in Florida and 70,000 in California?
Yes.
Was that a true
Or
stat?
some, yeah.
So we're second, our state is second?
In job growth, and I will say that we actually have a 2% higher veteran representation in our solar jobs than elsewhere in the nation. So second in job growth, lots of jobs for Florida, and more women than the national average, and 2% higher veteran representation in our jobs in the solar market, which is big.
Hello, hi. My name is Linda. I'm a student from Irving International. I'm a PV student, actually. So I'm the only woman there. So
Wow.
Go
yes,
power.
I just have a quick question. It will be a possibility in the future, a petition to do feeding Terra program for probably Florida instead of doing net metering.
I am.
Okay, let me explain what is FIT program. FIT program in Germany is, instead of doing a credit, a lousy credit, I'm sorry, that's my opinion, to give you, for excessive energy that the rate is doing, what is doing the FIT is actually you selling your electricity to them, and they will give you an actual, more money that the credit that they were giving us to us right now.
So the question was, is there a possibility that instead of net metering, we might have a feed-in tariff in Florida? I am not a rate design expert. I think that is a really great question that you could probably put your head together with some other awesome engineers here, or just people who are more inclined to know more about rate design. I don't think that would be a possibility in Florida, just because feed-in tariffs tend to work really well in areas that have wider distribution. We're heavily
It's more
populated.
expensive too, so.
Yeah, and where electricity is more expensive. But I also wanted to point out that she said that she is a student at Irwin Technical College, which it has a solar PV program and is local.
Yes.
So that's awesome.
Obviously there are layers in this. Having a solar farm is much better than having a coal plant, regardless of where the thing is. But if you're gonna build a solar array, doesn't it make sense to reuse real estate, putting it over parking lots, putting it over rooftops that already exist, than taking land that maybe was farmland, but it could be wild land, it could be used for other purpose, and burying it under solar panels, often being sprayed with herbicides and stuff like that, which are unhealthy.
So great question about solar siting. Doesn't it make sense to reuse land and space? And the answer is yes, that would be great. Just like the example I gave of the person who has a strip mall and they put solar on there. That is something that would be, I assume, probably widely done if community solar was legal. Probably every owner of a mini storage would be a new community solar developer, right?
As long as you can give them even some small benefit.
Yeah, so that's definitely
A tax benefit because people hate paying taxes.
exactly. They could eat the tax incentive. So Mike, we're gonna have Mike do all of our siting for Florida. We've got volunteer one. Simon.
Added benefit is it makes the building a lot cooler. It lowers the AC load.
Yeah, lowers the AC, and it's honestly a great advertisement, right? Come get your storage unit here. Support my business. It's right.
Polk County is becoming the warehouse capital of the world, I think. They're building million-square-foot warehouses all over the place. Why aren't the businesses that are building these thinking in terms of solar panels? It seems like it would make financial sense that would be the first thing that they would do. So why do you think that's not spreading, the use of solar panels on top of commercial buildings?
The question is not really about community solar, but why isn't solar more proliferate in commercial? And I don't know, but everybody here should be an advocate and go tell anyone you know who owns a commercial business that it is insanely friendly for them, both on a property tax abatement and accelerated depreciation. I mean, we're talking about 100% depreciation on your solar system. And on top of that, you get to take half of the tax credit, so 115% back, get paid to go solar. If you have a commercial business, you should be putting solar on it. Yeah, there's a reason that Walmart, IKEA, Target, 7-Eleven, these companies are doing this. And it's definitely economically sound for them to do it, and we're working on solar businesses and how we can better promote them. And if Rick said he's he's locally in Polk County, if you're in a rural county, on top of all of those benefits that I just went over, they can also qualify if they're in a USDA rural designated area for a secure loan through the USDA or the REAP grant, which is free money. It is a grant. Okay. Commissioner Kim?
I just wanted to say your presentation was awesome. I learned a lot. Thank you very much and it was really clear. But I wondered too, when we were talking about citing, I was Tampa Bay Water it's a water provider for Hillsborough and Pinellas, several counties. And so they have a big reservoir in Hillsborough County. It's 11,000 acres. And I had read about it first in China and Japan, but that now in California about how they're paneling reservoirs. And it not only cools the panels, but it saves on evaporation. So I wondered if, I had Tampa Bay Water look into it and with TICO, and they said it wasn't feasible at this time. That was last year. These things change fast. But I wondered if you had any information on that, because there are some water bodies that would be good for that.
They just had, it was just in the news, like a couple days, New Jersey did one
Oh,
at
wow.
a reservoir, and it's the largest in the Northeast.
Oh wow, that's good, New Jersey.
Floating panels.
Yeah,
So,
Orlando
it can be
has
done.
this.
Yeah.
So you have my email. I can connect you with the people doing it in Orlando. They love it. They call it photovoltaic.
Oh wow, that's great.
I imagine if you Googled or play around, you could probably find that article, because it just came out.
Thank you.
Okay, couple more questions.
The other thing that I mentioned in a different panel discussion that is really difficult with commercial solar
That's great.
is where you have utilities that don't let you switch from a demand system to a per kilowatt system. It totally kills your ability to do solar, because you have what's called the cloudy day syndrome. You get one cloudy day, and that controls your demand charge for the entire month. So, and the demand charge is about half your bill. It becomes uncontrollable. So, Florida Power and Light doesn't allow you to switch like Duke does to a straight kilowatt charge system. And I mean, I can't help customers who are under that program because there's no way to control their costs. So,
Now, let me just-
a requirement that utilities allow that would go a long way.
Yeah, so another policy point. Okay, question in the back. Speak loud.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, we've been facing that as a big issue in FP&L area with the demand charges. It really does kill the incentive. And so, if there are other utilities that are allowing businesses to switch to a straight dollar per kilowatt hour, it would be great if we could maybe encourage the PSC to make that a requirement, that if businesses would want to switch to a straight dollar per kilowatt hour, they'd be able to do that. That would really make a huge difference, I think, for commercial solar.
Absolutely. And
So this is the new working group right here, and and I would say approach the chambers of commerce and get them definitely involved in this too, because they are great representatives of businesses. We've had our first business co-op, so a co-op that's aimed at businesses, and I will say it was in Beach's Energy Service Utility, which is small, covers parts of St. Johns County, all Duval County beaches, or most of them, so it has a weird territory, and they have the same residential and commercial rates, so really great.
If we subscribe to community solar, could we be assured of a certain high percentage of that power was solar generated?
In other states, yes. In Florida,
Yeah.
no. No, because it's not a local project usually. That's, you know, coming directly to you.
It doesn't really exist here.
Yeah, that's the simplest answer. Other questions? Okay, I'll do 2 more questions, and then that'll give us some time actually to stay in here, because this is where our closing session will be, and everyone is getting really, this has been thought-provoking for that, because we're going to be focusing on policy and what's next and how can we continue to cultivate our state. So, Mary.
Kevin, do you have any suggestions on terminology that would unconfuse people? Because they have hijacked the term community solar. Is there some other name that we could make it? So
Utility solar.
Yeah.
Yeah, their
Yeah.
version
Yes,
is utility
solar, that's it, you know.
Because, okay, and then to really move this along in Tallahassee, which that's where the decisions would be, we've got to bring both parties into the picture. And so people gotta be talking to whoever is your representative about this. And
So Mary's had a great question. What terminology can we use? And this is really just a great next step for leaving this room, right? What terminology can we be using to really be transparent about where we want to end up in Florida? I would say let's leave community solar, that terminology that has been well rooted and established. Let's leave it where it belongs in what community solar is. And let's describe what we have going on here as utility solar subscriptions, or the industry, SIA, and a bunch of other states say utility sponsored models. Subscription works well because I think everyone has a pretty good understanding of what a subscription is. Thank you, Netflix. And that's what it is. It's a monthly fee at a premium price for a product. That recent research here in Florida has told us that solar is now cheaper than natural gas. So I think utility solar subscription, not a good sign for solar, is a really good term that we can use to help clear the air and confuse and lessen confusion. But open to ideas. Okay, last question.
Notwithstanding the dislike for the utility prescription solar, can you give us tell us where the FPL solar together stands?
So, notwithstanding disdain for utility solar subscription, where FPL Solar Together stands, I can't give you a clear answer on that. It's not yet approved by the Public Service Commission, is my understanding. So I guess that is an answer. But I will also say that Minnesota is a rock star example of rural electric cooperatives that are offering true, amazing community solar gardens. Remember, rural electric cooperatives, I cannot stress this enough, if you're on a rec, I know my parents have Clay Electric, you are a member owner. You own that utility, you shape that utility, and that utility has 9 rec principles that are on every one of their websites, highly advertised. They're founding principles for the people, by the people. This utility structure should be the birthplace of community solar. Okay. So I think I'll stop talking now. If you have other questions, you can come up. We can take a short health break or water break before our final session. Thank you.